Welcome to the EZCODE Projects series maze video number 3. If you have not done so already, please complete the previous EZCODE Projects maze series videos. For those of you that have done so, let's begin. The last video, we built the matrix skeleton that will contain our dynamically generated maze. In this video, we'll continue that work by adding borders to our matrix, as well as a unique cell identifier we'll use later as our set numbers. Remember, just type as I do, pause the video, or slow down the speed when needed. Understanding comes later. Let's begin. Open the maze project directory in VS Code. We'll open up VS Code, open the Explorer. I'm going to open folder in my projects EZCODE directory, and there's my maze folder. I'm going to go ahead and open that. Okay, now open the code.js file in VS Code. Mine is already open to the right. Let's add some borders to our matrix. Now, we could start by adding a style top or a border top and a border bottom to the first and last rows in the rows loop. So we could add it to this element here, and we would get an entire border across the top and an entire border across the bottom. But let's keep all the borders contained in the column loop. And there'll be a reason for that. It'll be an advantage later on to be able to determine which column cell of the top and bottom rows gets the entrance and exit locations. So we still need to know if it's the first row or the last row. So it's easy to know that the first row is always the first element of the array, which is always index 0. But how do we know the last row of an array, especially a dynamic array that could contain many rows? We could just use the number of rows in our constant. So at the top here we have 8 already assigned. But what if that changes? So we'll just ask the row array when it gets to the last one. So in the rows loop, add the following arguments to our function. So we're going to go down to the rows loop on line 27. We're going to go over to the end here. Now map is a function of an array, and it actually provides 3 arguments. The first one, let's see if this can come up here. We can see that VS Code is trying to help us out here, and we can see that array.map has 3 things. The value, which is the actual item of the array. In this case, if you recall, the rows array from array rows is producing an array of 8 values which are undefined. So this value coming in would be the JavaScript value undefined. The second one that we're not using right now but is available is the index of the item. So the first item would be 0, the second item would be 1, and so on. So, and the third argument we get is the actual array itself. So whatever array that begins the map, right here, this is the array, and here's the map function. This is going to get the array itself already. So to do that, we have to do something in JavaScript where this is a little bit of shorthand for an arrow function, and to do more than one argument, we have to enclose them in parentheses like this. So it might be a good habit if you want to do that for individual to just always put them in parentheses, but it's not necessary. So this one, if you remember, was index, but we can call it whatever we want to call it because now we're the consumer of it. We just know the second parameter to this method is going to be index. It's going to give it to us automatically. So here we need to identify what index it is. I could just write index, but then we may have a collision if we have to do the same thing down here in column. So I'm going to be very specific on what this is. This is a row index, and that's going to help us later on. And then we get the array, which would be, you guessed it, row array. So this is a way to know what's the item, what's the index, and give me the array. Now, in doing this, we'll need to know the last column. So let's see, we added that argument to the loop. So let's go ahead and review the logic that we need for all of our borders. If it's the top row, add a top border. If it's the bottom row, add a bottom border. If it's the first column of a row, add a left border. And if it's the last column of a row, add a right border. So let's fill in that logic. Now we're going to go down to the column loop. Now, because the column loop is enclosed within the row loop, we have access to all of these arguments. So that's why we got to be careful with how we're going to go about naming. So let's go ahead and add the same things to the column. Oops, where did I go there? So we're going to add a parenthesis here and one at the end of the column, and then we're going to go in, and the same thing, it's a map function, so we get an index. So we'll call it col index, and then the array. So col array. And now we have access to both things. We know what the indexes are, and we have access to the arrays. Now, as I mentioned, we're gonna put all of this logic into the column loop, and we're gonna assign the borders to the columns themselves. So let's go down here, and we're gonna be within the column loop. So right here. And we'll go above the return statement. And we'll make a little line there. Let's just make another one and tab over. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make an if statement. And the statement is if row index from above is equal to 0. Now we know, let's next line, curly braces. Now we know that we're on the first row. So we're going to tell the column above, column div, we're going to say, hey, column, we're going to need to put a border top on you. So we're going to do style again. And since it's border hyphen top, we're going to need to do the array brackets with a string, border hyphen top. And now we're just going to equal 1px. So this is another shorthand for CSS where we can specify several things in one line. So we just said the border itself is going to be of 1px in dimension. It's going to be a solid border, and if you want to play with that idea in the browser, you can do dashed, dotted, all kinds of different types of borders. We're going to use solid, and we're just going to color it black. Now, I'm going to copy this. Actually, we'll wait here for a second. Let's do the next part of this, which is the finding out when to put a border bottom on that. So we're just going to open this up again, and we're going to do another if statement. So we're going to say, hey, if your row index is 0, do this. And if we'll say row, same thing again, index is equal to. Now, for this second part, to know when we get to the last part of an array, we don't have to do this, but it's good practice to put it inside of parentheses, just like a math function. We want this completed first before we go to the equal operator. And we're going to say row array dot length minus 1. Now, this is used everywhere. This is how we know when we're at the end of an array. And what we're really just doing is, if you remember, if we have an array and it's 1, 2, 3, there are 3 items in here. So if we say row length, this would, for this array, it would say there are 3 items. So the count would be 3. But the index itself, right, the first one would be index 0, the second one is index 1, and the last one is index 2. So the indexes are always off by 1 because it starts at 0. But when we count, we say 1, 2, 3. So the length is always going to be 1 more than the last index of the array. So if we're looping through it, let's say this was the array and it was 1, 2, 3. the first row index is going to be 0. Is that equal to the array length 3 minus 1? Well, in this case, if this was the array length minus 1, we would look for 2. So is it index 2? No, it's 0. Next loop, it's index 1 now for row index. Is that 2? Nope. Then the next one it loops through. Row index is now 2, and the length minus 1 is 2, so we know we're at the end of the array. So that's how it works. Nothing's going to change that. We just have to learn that. And now we can say, all right, let's break into our curly braces. And now we're going to say something very similar to what we said before. So let's just go to line 42, and we're going to copy that. We're going to go back to 46 and paste it in there. Now, there is a slight difference. It's still going to be column div.style, but this time we're going to do border bottom. So just a quick change. Same type of pattern with the border style. We're just saying, hey, if you're the last row, then all the columns are going to get the border and bottom. So now we have a way to put the top and bottom borders. We just have to work on the left and the right side. And to do that, we're going to look at a very similar pattern. So what's the best way to do this? We're going to copy paste it. Okay, so we have it in the buffer. We're going to open a new line here. Oops. Just going to close this up here. Now that we copy pasted, there's always the dangers of getting something right on here. I'm just going to open this up here for our next line, and we're dealing with these two things. So we're not asking rows now, we're asking columns. So we're going to use the column index, and we're going to say, okay, so the column index is equal to 0. Then it's going to get a left border. So we're just going to go back down here again, and we're just going to say left border. And then if the column index, so let's change that. And this is going to be the end of the column array. And we have column index with column array. Same trick here. Dot length minus 1. We have the last item. Then we're going to go border right. But everything else is going to remain the same. So we have the row index. Are you the first row? Then the column gets a border top. Are you the last row? Then the column gets a border bottom. Are you the first column of the row? You get a border left. And if we are the last column, then we're going to get a border right. So let's take a look at this. Let's go ahead and make sure you have all the spacings in here so it's readable. We can come back to this. We're going to go, yep, we have updates. We're going to save it. We're going to go to the browser, and we're going to open our view HTML file because we haven't done that yet for this video. Open file. And projects EZCode maze source view HTML, because that's what loads everything into the browser. Now we're going to click open. There we go. I'm going to open up the developer console, and let's take a look at what we're doing here. So what did we say? We said the rows themselves are not going to get the borders, but the columns are. So the first top left column, it has a border top and a border left. So that's great. That's exactly what we wanted. The second one should just have a border top, and it does, and so on. And then if we go through each one, again, border bottom, border left. So this is great. This is looking really good. We now have our borders. So let's go back to the code.js file and add some content to each cell. Okay, so we're just going to go back to VS Code, and let's go ahead and we're going to add the row and column index. So another thing about a div, all the DOM elements are slightly different, but a div has the ability to add text inside of it. And to do that, it's going to be, once again, we're going to take the element that we have, but instead of saying style, there's a property called inner and then HTML, and the HTML is fully uppercase, the entire word. So that's a way to say, hey, element inner HTML, I'm going to give you some values, and what we're going to do is we want to put together the row index and the column index. So to do that, I'm going to put it in parentheses just to make it a little bit cleaner. And I'm going to say row index plus column index. Okay, well, let's save our work and refresh the browser. So we have some updates. We're going to save, go back to the browser, and refresh. And note that there is only one number when we wanted both indexes. So that's a bit strange there. Also, let's see, this would be 0, 0, and then this would have been row 0, column 1, and this would have been row 0. Let's see, it looks like these numbers are increasing too. So it looks like perhaps they're summing together. So each index is adding to the next, and that's not what we wanted. We wanted to get a separate one, so we'd have two different numbers. So let's go back to the code.js file and see if we can figure out why that happened. So we'll go back to the code.js file, and we can see what we're doing right here is we're taking the row index and the column index, and we're adding them together. So in JavaScript, when it takes two numbers, it gladly adds them together. What we want to do is convert it to a string, and a way to do that is called concat. And to concat something together, all we have to do in JavaScript is say plus an empty string and then plus column index. So row index plus a string automatically turns into a string. So if this row index was 0, it's now string 0. And that's what we want. And then this string will add to column index, converting this one to a string as well. So let's go ahead and save our work again. And we'll go back to refresh the browser. And go ahead and refresh it. And now we can see both indexes. But it looks strange when it's not centered. So by default, the div is going to align to the top left corner. This is how it always happens. It's the default behavior. What we would probably like instead is if each column centered these values along the X and Y axis. So we can see right here, let's just pick the top left one. And we can see the size of the div, and we see, yes, indeed, it's not centered. So to do something like that, what we can do is let's go back to the code.js file and just add a few bits of styling. So go ahead and go back to VS Code. We'll go back to our JavaScript, and we're talking about each column because that's what holds the value. We'll go right up here to where our styles are. And let's say we're going to do column div dot style. And once again, we're going to do a display equals flex, and then just do a column div again style. But in this case, it's not going to be a dot because we need to do align hyphen items and justify hyphen content, both flex properties that we can use. So we'll go ahead and do this here, array brackets with a string, and we'll say align items. And this is going to be center. And then we're just going to copy paste, and then instead of align, we're going to say justify, and instead of items, we're going to say content. But everything else is going to remain the same. So column div style, justify content, center. Let's go ahead and save our work, and we'll refresh the browser. And a lot cleaner. So note how the inner HTML is centered just like we wanted it to now when we see here. Let's go ahead and play with this real quick. So what did we just add? Once again, if we took away display flex, we'll lose justify center or justify content and align items, which we do. And what is align items doing for us? You can see it's up and down. It's even showing you some arrows there. And justify content is left to right. So that's great. We have, let's see, everything centered. We also have a unique identifier for each column each cell that's in each row and column. So if we said where's 7, 7, there's only one. It's right down here in the bottom. We can use our code to find it if we needed to. Every piece, and that's because each row has an identifier, which is 0 here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and then each column. This is all column 0. So we could extract all the columns if we wanted to, all the rows, whatever we want to do. That's what the value of the unique identifier does for us. So nice job, everyone. I mean, we really have a nice base to build out our maze algorithm. In the next video, we'll attempt the next portion of the algorithm that randomly adds the inner walls to the columns of each row. If you've enjoyed this video, click like and then subscribe buttons to get notifications of new content. Thank you for exploring programming with me, and I'll see you in the next video.